Kicking things off today, we are joined by a speaker from one of the largest professional services networks in the world. This enterprise is known for advertising some of the largest companies on how to build a better working world. And here to share new insights on the biggest trends shaping the workplace and what that means for employee experience leaders charged with designing a better future for work. I'm really excited and please welcome to the stage Digital People Transformation Lead at EY, Zainab Zubir, and Unilever's very own Kaz Hassan.
Thanks everyone, and welcome back to our first session of the day. I'm really excited. I'm a bit more involved in this one, so lots of great content that I'm looking forward to delivering with you. So hopefully you recognize me now. My name is Kaz. I'm one of your Unite hosts, but I am also a product manager at Unilever, meaning I work on help designing the new features of our Unilever employee experience platform. But today I'm also joined by Zainab, or Z as I call her, who is a Digital People Transformation Lead at EY. She's also my former colleague and friend, not former friend, current friend, but I'm joined today by Z, and we will be talking to you all about how to design a people-centered digital HQ of the future. So let's get cracking. So when we put our minds together on this particular topic, we really wanted to start with, okay, ultimately, what do we want people to get out of this session? And one of the things we wanted them to take away is specifically around, okay, there's been a lot of research that's been done over the pandemic and after the pandemic in terms of how our people experiences are changing. What we wanted to do is do the work for you, basically. We read those reports and the data and the insights, and we've amalgamated what we feel to be the most insightful research tidbits that are coming to you, and hopefully that will act as a shortcut for you to see what's happening with people experience. Next, we want to apply that to you and your role. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you're in the employee experience space. So what do all the latest data, research, and insights mean for you in your role? Next, we want you to be able to actually apply it to your day-to-day, have a slightly different mindset in terms of being able to understand how we create human-centered thinking to future-proof your experience design. And you'll be hearing a lot of the word experience and experience design today. And that's kind of one of the key things that we want people to take away. It's all about that experience.
Indeed.
So why did we pick this particular topic? So on the screen, you can see a survival equation. And before we tell you that, what we basically considered was that for those of you working in our corporations and our companies, the next few years, if we're honest, it's going to be quite tough. There's a lot of pressure from customers, consumers. There is a cost of living crisis, and consumers want good value. At the same time, they know what a good service looks like. So from your companies, they're expecting good value for money and good service. So you're kind of upping the pressure on your companies a little bit. At the same time, we have pressure from our governments and central organizations to improve standards, compliance of ESG, things like environmental standards, compliance, corporate social responsibility. Again, we're upping the pressure on our organization. And of course, we also have the pressure from employees. Our employees know what a good employee experience looks like. We have high standards now, and hopefully you can resonate that as an employee in yourself, but also as someone working in the employee experience space. So when you put those three things together, you've really upped the ante and the pressure on organizations, which means it's going to be a tough time. Now, if we take a look back at that survival equation, what does that mean for our organizations? So companies are expecting to reduce their costs. There are high costs. We're going through a time of recession, and there will be pressure from organizations to reduce their expenditure. At the same time, we've just come out of a pandemic, and we can kind of see what's happened to companies that are exposed to a high amount of risk, essentially, and that is not a good position to be in. So in a state of recession, they want to reduce the risk that they have. But at the same time, there's pressure from shareholders and investors to increase profits. They have money to recuperate from the COVID times. People have been losing money. There's pressure to increase their profits and their profit margins. But at the same time, you don't want to be outcompeted. It's not the time where you can lay back on your laurels. You need to continue to improve your business and innovate. And we've called this the survival equation. So if you look at this on the screen, reducing costs, reducing risks, but at the same time, increasing profit and innovation. Now, you may be someone that works in finance, or you could just be an average person. You can look at that equation and think, I don't like my odds. Well, may the odds be ever in your favor, because you, as people that work in the employee experience space, have a secret weapon to unlock this equation. And that is our digital employee experience. Now, we know that the future headquarters is no longer this kind of physical environment that everyone goes to in a city centre and your whole business centres around that physical workplace. More on that later from Z, from a research perspective. But we do know a digital HQ is the future. And because it is digital, we know it impacts things like the war on talent that we've discussed, employee productivity, sustainability in terms of how we reduce our travel, making sure that we kind of reduce that carbon footprint. But because it's also digital, it can help us to rationalize our IT estate, bringing multiple tools into one, but also rationalize our physical real estate, hopefully reducing some of the cost on those physical workspaces. So you can kind of see here how something which might seem like a simple concept, your employee experience platform or your digital HQ, essentially can unlock some of the key parts of that equation which are necessary for survival. Now, hopefully, well, when we're designing our employee experience, we need to know, and our digital employee experience, we need to know ultimately, who are we designing for? And there are loads of needs that we need to design for when designing our digital employee experience. But what I've learned, and what I've learned from the research, is though, the last time I checked in, and probably the last time you checked in, the needs have probably changed a little bit, which is why it's really important we check back into the research and understand what are the modern day needs. And Z is going to talk us through the latest and greatest research insights.
Thank you, Kaz. Great. So I wanted to kick us off with the Microsoft Work Trend Index 2022 report. And it's packed with great insights and information. But I wanted to pick out the 3 areas that I thought really resonate when we think about where we want to work in the future, how we want to work, what sort of jobs do we want to do, and what's our purpose? What's the worth it equation? So we're seeing that employees have actually got a new worth it equation. Post-pandemic, 53% of employees are more likely to prioritize their health and well-being over work. And this is something that organizations also prioritized during the pandemic because they focused on mental health and well-being like never before. And that's really percolated and stayed in the fabric of how we now engage with our employees. But we're also seeing 52% of Gen Zs and millennials, they're likely to consider changing their employer in the next year, and that's up about 3% year on year. And so we're also seeing that it's gone are the days where we stay with one employer and we assume that the younger generation, the Gen Zs and millennials, will sort of work their way up the career ladder. They have choice, they have opportunity.
Yep.
And so when we're thinking about how we retain and attract and empower our talent, we need to consider that actually they're not here to stay. They're here to grow, they're here to thrive, they're here to be productive individuals. And another really interesting thing I found reading this report was that this particular cohort of the Gen Zs and millennials, 70% of them, very high stat, actually engaged in what we call the side hustle. So during COVID, we had a lot of time at home and many of us started thinking about, okay, so yes, I have a job, but what really is my passion? What do I want to do when I retire? Or what do I want to do that's actually above and beyond my day job? And so we saw that they started sort of engaging in these creative pursuits. I, for one, started an incense business because I needed my house to smell wonderful during the pandemic. And so we are seeing whether they're doing drop shipping on Amazon, whether they're going and doing podcasts. We're really seeing this alternate sort of streams of income. And this is really important because younger employees are not coming to you because they need jobs and money, because to be honest, they can sit at home and make money off digital platforms just as easily as it is to just go into an office.
They've got that digital knowledge, they're kind of diversifying, playing the field a little bit. Yeah.
Keeping it fluid. But then obviously one of the things that has come from that is that we're seeing this always on culture. We're always accessible. There's your WhatsApp and your Teams and your email, and people want to talk to you and meet you. And so we always feel like we need to respond. We always need to give someone an answer.
Yeah.
I mean, before we may just sort of look at an email and read it and craft it and send it to someone to read it for us. Now it's, okay, you need to respond. And so we are also seeing that data reflected. I mean, it's no surprise, 252% increase in weekly time spent in meetings since sort of the beginning of the pandemic. And we're seeing 32% increase in chats. And also 28% increase in after-hours work. Now, that's not all bad, because 28% outside hours means that people are probably being flexible. They want to, exactly, they want to spend potentially a longer lunch break, or they might want to go and, get their hair done, but that means they're working
like
later
hours. like
I did this morning. They want to spend time maybe in the evening sort of doing focus work. But what that means is that we need to provide them with the well-being tools and the data and the insights to then understand why they're feeling potentially burnt out, or why they're feeling like they're not getting work done during the day because they're in lots of meetings. So how do we start thinking about this always-on culture? And then one of the key things, I think, when we're designing a digital HQ is also understanding that we are social creatures. And employers really want to rebuild this social capital when we go back into an office. Because what we're seeing is that 51% of hybrid employees are actually looking to move to being more remote. And that means less and less interaction with people. But we're also seeing 43% of leaders saying that relationship building is the greatest challenge. Because as we know, Kaz, trust is not something that you just assume. It's something you work towards. You build trust. You need to be in situations where you're tested. And that really does require face-to-face interaction. So how do we, again, create the spaces to ensure that we have these opportunities to build trust? But then a very high stat here, 76% of employees with thriving relationships say they were satisfied with their employer. So two things are important here, because when we look at the data around people who leave organizations, it's those with smaller network sizes that actually leave. Whereas if you actually think of your workplace as somewhere that you're not just going to for work, but you make friends.
Yep.
In my case, I met my husband there.
Which isn't me, by the way.
No. We're really considering how we're taking away these experiences to make friendships and relationships. So again, how do we create these spaces and ensure our employees can thrive? Another report I would like to bring your attention to is the EY Future of the Workplace Index. Again, very similar data. EY analyzed C-suite leaders and employees across 501 different companies and industries. And the clear overriding theme here is that the hybrid model is here to stay. Whatever we think, it's here to stay in whatever form. But harking back to what Kaz said around the survival equation, a lot of these C-suite leaders, they reacted to the pandemic. They thought of digital transformation and collaboration platforms as a response. We need to transact, we need to connect, we need to collaborate, we need to get business done in this sort of crisis situation. What they didn't do, Kaz, is think of it from a longevity perspective. This is actually a great way to work. How do we design so that we do the best work in these circumstances? And this is one of the things we're working with a lot of organizations to start really looking at their digital experience. So 75% of companies indicate they don't envision a centralized workspace. That's a very high number. So how do we then look at ensuring that we've optimized this digital experience and that we can maintain it? What are the long-term effects of living and working and doing everything in a digital HQ? We're seeing 57% of respondents say that productivity has increased. This is twofold. One, we had a lot of time. during the pandemic to sit at home and work. But also, again, going back to the always on point, we felt like we had to be online and available so that people thought we were working. But really, is that a measure of productivity? The fact that I sat in front of my computer all day and you can say that I spent 9 to 5 online? So we need to start thinking about how we measure productivity in a much more creative way. And that, of course, manifests itself in evidence of employee stress and increased burnout. And how do we redress this model? How do we start thinking about it much more sustainably? You know, just 28 days of holiday and we don't really switch off because, again, we're always on. But the most important stat for me is that 84%, because 84% of leaders believe that digital tools to facilitate work will change. This means they're not only investing in more tech above the tech we already have, but they're also thinking about how it differs. It's a very different type of tech change. So we're actually looking at how we used to do things that we did in an office, in the physical environment. How do we start doing them in the virtual environment? So things like leadership, accountability, mentorship, networking, collaboration, all of that needs to be as effective as they would be in the physical environment. And so these are great stats, and I hope they're resonating, but actually we need to look at the people and the personas behind these stats. So over to you, Kaz, to kick us off with some of these stories.
Cool. So lots of interesting insights there, but I guess you want to think now, and actually this is the fun bit of the presentation. What does that mean for the people you're designing for? You're in the employee experience space. What does your modern employee look like? Now, I'm sure if you work in employee experience, you've heard of the concept of personas, or probably more, you've probably designed some of your personas yourself. Now, it's a common concept, but we're basically here to tell you that you've got it wrong. And your personas that you're designing are not diverse enough, and they're not understanding of the modern day needs based on the research we've just looked at. So we're here to shake that up a little bit and think about what your employee looks like. Think about when you're creating personas, it's no longer frontline in office 9 to 5. You need to think about people and those personas in terms of how they're entangled with home, how they're entangled with the way that they transport, their doctor's appointments, family commitments, even holidays. All of those things are entangled that help us understand the people that you're designing for. So essentially what we're saying is, when you're designing your personas, we need to think about how your employees work, where they work, who they are, and what drives them as a person. So basically, Z and I have crafted 2 personas each, and we're going to present them to you to give you an idea of the sorts of people that you're working with, essentially. And the first person is my mate Sandra, Sandra of the Side Hustle. She's actually my favorite. And Sandra is in her mid-50s. She's a sales project manager. And during the pandemic, she was actually put on furlough for a short while. And during that time, she gained a passion for yoga. More specifically, she actually started to create a business where she would run yoga workshops. And she now has a network of like-minded yogis, which is apparently what you call people that love yoga.
Something new there.
And she's got into this passion so much so that she now can't wait for her final child to leave home, so she gets that extra spare room that she can use to plan out her sessions and basically grow her business, essentially. So really what she's looking for from a prioritization perspective, and you'll see at the bottom of every persona here, in order what their top priorities are. So the top priority is the one at the top, which for Sandra is flexibility, and she's least concerned about her title and role. So essentially what we're seeing here is Sandra, given what we know about her now, is that freedom and flexibility to basically run her yoga workshops, learn more about yoga, is paramount to her experience. And there may be some critics in the room hearing about Sandra, or some conservatives that think, well, why should we accommodate Sandra's side hustle? Why can't she just get her ass up and work? And the reason we need to accommodate Sandra is, if you remember back to that equation slide, one of the 4 things on there was that we needed to increase innovation. And it's the Sandras of the world, the entrepreneurs, the innovators, that are going to push our organizations forward. So we really can't afford to lose our Sandra with the side hustle.
Harness that energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now I move on to my second persona, which is Anthony, the frontline. And whilst his role type may be frontline, he is much more than his role type. Specifically, he's got a young family, and he wants his young family, his kids, to be able to see him at work and understand what he does makes a difference. He's actually a station manager. He works at a train station. And sometimes his kids come in to see him, and they see how he's making people's lives better by ensuring that they are receiving a good service at the train station and that they can get where they need to from A to B. Now, from a prioritization perspective, Anthony is really concerned about purpose. He's younger. He wants to make sure that he's doing good. He's contributing to his company. He actually really wants to make sure that his company values him. He has loads of insights on the front line, and he wants to be able to contribute those insights to the company and make sure that leaders are paying attention to them and implementing them. But also, he wants to work his way up the ladder. He wants to kind of build his way up as a station manager, use those insights in a more leadership type position.
Yeah.
He's less concerned about the flexibility that Sandra was concerned with and the location. He's built up a good network locally. He works at his local station. His kids are only around the corner. So you see how that kind of flexibility and location isn't that big a deal. He's got a local network. In fact, he's quite happy being at his station. So those are my two personas. Hopefully you remember Sandra and Anthony. And I will hand over to Z, who has two quite different types of personas.
Love Sandra. I feel like I want to channel her.
You'll love a bit.
Love a bit of Sandra.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to look at Olivia. So the Olivias of the world are they're your connectors. They're your people who actually focus on connection. They also are the ones who know who to go to. They know the gossip. Yep. They know how to. They know how to. Basically, us. They know who to go to affect change, and they know also which senior stakeholders can actually influence the organization. They are those whippersnappers. So they may be doing their normal 9-to-5 job, but the actual value of the Olivias in your organization is much wider. So if you're trying to make change happen, you want the Olivias to be part of your programs. But what we saw with the Olivias of the world is that during the pandemic, they lost their visibility because they didn't have a space to come into and have their charisma sort of overshine. They didn't have a space to make those connections. They didn't have after work drinks. So there was a bit of a disconnect for the Olivias because they were just being measured and valued for their output through a screen.
Must be quite disheartening.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's the Olivias who then go on their social platforms and then start mums in the pandemic groups, for example, and share tips and tricks on newborns during the pandemic. Because what Olivias sort of seek from an organization is beyond transactional. So in a digital experience, most of your conversations are transactional. It's, hi, I called you, a quick question for this. You might have a bit of chit chat about the weekend, but you're not really meeting people in this sort of serendipitous way by the coffee machine and having a chat. So when we look at how we design, again, if you want to keep those people that actually lubricate conversation and can get things done in an organization, within it, you also have to create digital spaces for them. And so for her, something like a title and role would be really important. She wants to focus on working up that ladder. She also thinks location is important. She might want to be in a big city so she can get to know people, go for events after work, etc. So we really need to consider how we create these spaces for the Olivias. But who are we designing for? We are really designing for Chris, the next gen. We're talking about Gen Z, yeah, pretty much you. The digital natives, right? So Chris is used to building he's used to building his network digitally. He wants instant gratification. He uses nudges and data and insights and integration. And it's part and parcel of his consumer experience. So he's expecting frictionless experiences, right? That's much more immersive. Day to day, he's using Amazon and Netflix and he's using Deliveroo. And his Apple Watch is connected to his Google Wallet. And if he wants to return something, it's going through a bot. And then what do we do to poor little Chris? We take him, we put him in an organization and we give him an Excel spreadsheet to copy data from and put it in another Excel spreadsheet. And then take that data and put it in another system, which, by the way, doesn't speak to the other system that he again needs to put information into. So are we actually getting value out of Chris? Are we treating these digital natives with respect, to be honest, because they can bring so much more value to our front end processes. And so again, it's these Chris's that we saw, the 70% that had the side hustle, they're making money on the side. So maybe pay is not as important, but purpose certainly is. So if they're not part of an organization that's valuing their feedback as individuals and they're contributing to, they're going to leave. So I think, Kaz, we're going to actually find out what our audience thinks about these personas.
Yes, exactly. So remember those 4 personas and how, whilst we've spoken about their story and how them as people and their story impacts their priorities, whether it's title, role, location, flexibility, pay, or purpose. Now we pose that question to you. We've got a poll which will be hopefully popping up on your screen any second. And in that poll, we want you to answer what is most important to you when considering a new role. Cool, so we're going to give you a few seconds there, read the question, understand it. There are 5 potential answers that you can see. What is most important to you when considering a new role? Is it purpose? Is it pay? Is it flexibility? Is it the physical location? Or is it that job title role when you're applying for it?
Tough question.
So take your time, think about it. Think about how those personas, did you resonate with one more than another? Do you think you're a mix of some of them? That might help influence your answer. And I have the iPad with me now, so I'm seeing those live connections. So this is really interesting as well. So we're seeing a mix of everything. So everyone there's a mix of stuff. So people have voted on at least one option. So what we're seeing at the moment is the one with the highest votes is flexibility. That kind of in line with what you were speaking about from a research perspective in terms of hybridity is here to stay. We're seeing purpose quite high as well, interestingly, above pay.
Yeah,
so that's pretty interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily thought that.
I expected that.
But so we've got kind of pay in 3rd place, title and role in 4th place, and location is at the bottom, which makes sense given that people want flexibility. So we are now, what it seems based on what you guys are saying is that you're no longer considering your next role based on the physical office location, which is great considering our talk is about that digital HQ. So
yeah, it's very interesting, the flexibility point. I think it was 77% of millennials on LinkedIn will only apply for a job if it says flexible on it.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
So that is important. And so you now know what's driving you and your motivations, and you've seen how it's driven our different types of personas. Now let's have a think about what that means for those of you that are designing those experiences. How do you, someone that has a role in employee experience, what does that mean to the way you should be working? So let's have a look at the changes that we're expecting to see. Over to you, Z.
So as we can see, employee experience leaders have their work cut out for them. They've got to deal with the employees and their needs and their changing emotions and everything that they want that we've just talked through. They've got to deal with pressure from the board and the C-suite. They've got to deal with changing their organization and their culture within their department as well. Now at EY, we're seeing a lot of teams, specifically in the employee experience space around HR, moving from this traditional approach to how they work to being much more futuristic. They're moving from being more sort of process-driven and the custodians of company morale and etiquette, and they're moving to looking at how they can actually add real value in shaping strategy and being more cross-functional, proactive and innovative. So really supporting the front line, who's making us the money, and putting them at the center of the people agenda. They want to get more involved in the experience and how they can start crafting that. So in the good old days, we used to see specifically around technology that this was very much the CIO's domain, right? So the CIO buys licenses, the CIO then decides how this gets rolled out. I've worked on many a digital workplace rollout, and it's always been for the CIO. However, now we're seeing that the digital workplace is actually, it requires a amalgamation of a single working group that has your CIO, your CHRO, your COO, and also this new role of the CXO, someone who actually looks at the experience for customers and then sort of seeing how that actually percolates down to the employee experience.
That's a chief experience officer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Chief Experience Officer. So we're looking at a real shift in this space, and CXOs are getting involved to really stress test IT and HR strategies. We need much more cross-functional teams. We need the COO to be working with the CHRO so that they can start thinking about people more holistically. Who's in our frontline and how do we enable them? And a real key shift is also modeling the behaviors. This community needs to start becoming much more tech savvy. They need to upskill. They need to stop having to ask IT to build them apps. They need to be able to build this for themselves and self-service. You know, do you need an internal comms app? Okay, fine, I'll build you one in Microsoft Teams. They're also looking at data. Using the data that they're getting, their people experience data, to create better experiences. They're looking at simplifying and rationalizing in this space of explosion of tech. Kaz, what are you seeing from this traditional to future state model?
So I work for Unily. We build an employee experience platform. So we have these kind of unique interactions where we get to speak to businesses like EY, see how they're going through that process in employee experience platforms and what that means for employee experience leaders. And from a technology perspective, I'm a bit of a techie, so I'm interested in this, is that we used to find that people would say, okay, we need to acquire a new piece of technology. It's this platform we need to acquire. It's something, it's the HRIS.
Yeah.
That sort of tech stack view of employee experience is kind of going away. We're now moving towards this kind of consumer experience-based view, which is that we need to be observing the best consumer experiences that our employees are experiencing in their personal lives, and understanding what is the magic that makes that experience. Because ultimately, there's a lot of competition in that area. Why are people picking these apps? And it's based on that experience. So moving away from an IT or technology view of experience, moving to consumer experiences, taking inspiration from them and being able to replicate them in an employee experience world. But that also kind of comes back to the way we view processes, which is that I'm sure a lot of traditional organizations may have these kind of Visios where it's like, this is our process to book holiday. They do this, and then they do this, and then they do this. Now that kind of process-based design is out the window, essentially. What we're saying is that we want this kind of human-centered design, which is actually, when we think about it from the person first, we realize that it's not just about booking holiday. It's that they actually want to be able to see the availability of their team on the days that they want to book holiday. Are there other events happening in the organization that they might not want to miss? So you see here how when you don't think about just a single process, there are these complex interactions when you think about the person and their needs that mean that we want this kind of more human-centered design, essentially. So lots of changes there from that traditional state to that.
The future state.
The future state, exactly.
Okay, so what we want to actually look at here is what we do at EY is not just say, hey, let's go and design personas. Yes, we put humans at the center of this, but then we also look at the persona holistically. We look at what your employees already have. You've gone and spent millions on buying new technology, on digital transformation programs, on licenses. So what do you already have, and how can we make them start connecting with each other? So if you think of Sandra, how can we ensure that Sandra's voice or listening platform, which might be Qualtrics or Peakon or Glint, is connected to her well-being platform? How do we ensure that her feedback is continuous? You know, most organizations only poll their people once a year. They send like one big survey out, and by the time the results are like passed and you get it, we've moved on. So we need to be thinking about continuous listening to our employees. How do we take that feedback and ensure their knowledge experience and their learning experience is optimized in the flow of work? How do we ensure that Olivia can get through her service desk tickets because she really wants to be spending time making connections and fostering and growing her employee network? So when we think about these people, not just as I work in sales and therefore we're going to optimize your CRM system, that's when we start looking broader. And interestingly, when we speak to our clients, a lot of these organizations, you'll have the learning piece, for example, will be a new learning platform that the head of learning is going and trying to acquire, not thinking about actually how does this connect to my experience platform, or how does this connect to my intranet or digital workplace platform. You might be having someone sort of going and buying a new HRIS system.
Yep.
And then again, that's not connected to how we get feedback. It's not connected to your travel and expenses. I actually had a colleague who didn't put through an expense because it was just too much effort.
Yeah.
So she just footed the bill herself. Thanks, Mary. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that, again, we need to start treating personas as individuals that are holistic across this spectrum and not just trying to improve one system, one core underlying system, and thinking that, oh, somehow that's going to make the experience better. It's the other way around. So if we move on, our sort of philosophy is divided into 3 areas. So I'm going to focus, we love a good circle, clearly.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
But I'm going to focus on 3 areas. So the bricks is the physical environment. What's the role of the physical space or office, right? Does it actually need to exist for this persona? Is this the most optimum way for them to work? Or can we be flexible in this concept? Now, if we take that to the bytes, which is our digital environment, I really want to make a point here, because when we design the physical environment, we make sure that the electricity cables and the pipes and the bricks are not exposed, right? We make sure it's a beautiful environment that is designed with spaces where you can collaborate, you can focus, you can take a break, you can have coffee, you might have outdoor spaces, etc. But somehow, when we design a digital environment, we expose everything. We give people 25 different apps, so this is a stat again, 25 different applications that are not connected to each other, and we just expect them to figure it out. And again, they move between 25 different applications 10 times in an hour. So that's equivalent to me in an office, sitting at one desk, another desk, moving to an office room, moving to the coffee area 10 times in an hour. Can you imagine the mental exhaustion we're putting ourselves through?
Must be like, I'd find that, aside from being frustrating, it's just like ineffective and unproductive. So
Absolutely, but that's exactly what we're doing to our brains, right? And then, but the most important thing here is the behaviors. The behaviors, how do we really talk about culture and make sure that resonates? Because we all have great policies, right? We talk about flexible work. Yes, you can do that. But how is that actually combating digital exhaustion and empowering managers to have these conversations realistically? How are we actually ensuring that managers feel like they can talk to their employees about these behaviors and ensuring that that flexibility works for everyone in the team? So it's really important to focus your persona and then look at the bricks, the bytes, and the behaviors of experience. And how do we do that? So getting experience right requires transition in all of these areas, right?
Yeah.
But you can actually focus on those quick wins. And so if we move on, how do we do that? How do we get to a place where we've looked at all of this? And we start off with listening. Now, when we say listening, there's passive and there's active listening. Passive listening is the data. So what's your experience data? How are people collaborating? Where are the pockets of really high collaboration? Is the claims team chatting to the HR team? Maybe they don't need to. Is the claims team chatting to the operations team? How are they actually working? And then matching that with operational data, can we find the teams that are really high performers and match that with how they're collaborating? So passive listening and passive data is so valuable and important in this digital HQ experience. But then also, of course, listening to our employees requires active listening. So stop pulsing them once a year and start asking them more frequently. But of course, we don't like doing surveys. I personally don't respond to them. But start thinking about how you would get that data in short, sharp, bite-sized chunks. Just a happy face, a thumbs up, that can give you the results that you want back. So once we listen to our employees, we look at how we design. Now, experience design is the one place, if you were going to spend money as an organization, spend it there. Look at those personas, understand the required experience, understand the underlying technology. It may not always be that you need to go and buy more tech.
Yep.
It might actually be an adoption problem, or it might be, again, a behavioral problem, or it's just they're not integrated, and maybe the CHRO's team needs to speak to the CIO's team a bit better and work in that single working group. You don't need to spend more money. But if you're going to spend it in experience design. It's a real skill. And this is what consumer-grade applications that you were talking about,
exactly.
They invest in that. They look at what that experience looks like. And that's why they get it right.
And that's ultimately what they need to survive, basically. The only reason those sorts of apps exist is purely because of their experience. There are some apps that you can do elsewhere in the web, but that purely survive based on how good their experience
is.
Yeah.
And then that moves us to the digitization piece. Yes, great, we know who we're designing for, we've listened. Then we can look at what technology is out there and what the best one for it is. And then finally, we're gonna go back and we're gonna look at the operating model. So the operating model really is about looking at your teams and ensuring they're upskilling. And Kaz, you're gonna talk us through what that looks like when you get this experience piece right.
Yes, so hopefully you've learned some of the theory there on how you can improve your experience, essentially, how you can design a better people experience design. But ultimately, how does that improve and impact the experience of a real employee? Now, hopefully you remember Sandra with her side hustle and her yoga. So let's have a look at Sandra's day, a day in the life of Sandra. Now, she wakes up about 7:30, and when she wakes up, she's at home, of course, well, hopefully, maybe in a yoga studio if it's been a heavy one. But the first thing she does is she checks her employee app. Gone are the days of going straight to Outlook or email. She checks the app, checks the latest notifications, checks the latest company news, because that's kind of the sort of thing you want to be addressing early on. You don't want to go into those heavy emails. Then she starts her commute into town. She gets her app and she finally checks Outlook. So she goes through her emails, and she also notices that she needs to do a bit of training on sustainability in the workplace.
Yeah.
It's a video, and she likes video. Video content is great. We spoke about that throughout Unite. And she's also quite passionate about sustainability, so this is great. She catches up on that training course again on her commute. Now, about 9:30, she doesn't go straight into the office.
Nope.
She actually goes to a coffee shop, and in that local cafe, she works internationally. She's got part of her sales project team in the US. So what she does is she looks at what updates they've done, makes sure she's done those updates, pings over some actions to make sure that when they wake up first thing in the morning, that she's done her bit and they're ready to get going. Now, it's actually quite a complex deck. They want to perfect it. It's going to go out to a lot of people. So she wants to make sure she's got the right people on board. She goes into her people directory in her employee experience platform. She finds the right contacts through searching, sorting, and filtering. She can also see more about them. They're more than just their name and their job title. She actually finds out that Joe in the US that she needs to speak to also likes yoga. So she's got like that instant connection.
Yeah,
exactly.
I can imagine. That's happened to me, actually.
So once you start to kind of understand these people better, you see how these kind of interactions are better in their day.
It's a bringing your whole self to work concept,
exactly.
isn't it? Yeah.
And when it gets to about 10:30, she doesn't head straight into the office. She actually, remember, she likes yoga and she runs yoga classes. And she heads to a yoga studio where she runs a yoga class for her students. And just as she's finishing up, she actually gets a ping notification to basically nudge her in her app to say from Salesforce, oh, you've got a new prospect created for you in Salesforce. Yeah. So you see how the technology is speaking to each other. It's seamless, it's frictionless, and it's nudging her as well.
Yeah.
Now, over lunch, she she basically noticed someone's asked her a question on her social channel about something she needs to answer for her role. Now, the system recognizes that she's actually answered a similar question before, and there's some knowledge articles out there that she can give. So the bot gives her that information, she sends it out to that person, and like bish bash bosh, she can move on.
Yeah, there's an interesting stat there. So we spend 7 weeks of our working life looking for content. That's more than I get on holiday.
So the right experience brings those systems together and gives her the information, saving her time.
Yeah.
And then finally, at 2 o'clock, she does go into the office. There is a space for it, but it's for a hybrid brainstorming session.
Yeah.
And so essentially what they're doing is they're coming up with better ideas to improve that particular project. And they're collaborating with people in the physical office. But we said they've got some international colleagues. We beam them in and they're hopefully working from the same page. both literally and physically, because they're in Mural. So we've got a hybrid brainstorming session. And then as we get towards the end of the day, she missed her town hall when she was doing a few other bits. She catches up on that town hall. And she also gives some kudos, some recognition to the people that were speaking at that town hall, so they know that she's engaged and that she did watch it.
You really need that feedback loop when you're doing digital programs.
And last but not least, she actually gets a notification saying, hey, you've worked a few hours today, you've put your shift in, time to log off. And she hops to a restaurant for some drinks and nibbles with her colleagues, making use of that time in the office. So hopefully you can see there how, given that we know Sandra and what her priorities are, that's what is really transforming her employee experience.
Maximizing productivity, right? Because she doesn't want to waste time looking for things. She wants to be spending that time doing yoga.
Yeah, she wanted flexibility and she got
But still ace her job. She's really good at her job.
So moving on, I obviously said to you earlier, we have different types of personas. People have their different priorities. And we essentially want to know, how do those priorities, how can you cater for those different types of priorities? Like the Olivia, the connectors of the world. Can you build new social capital, for example, creating digital community spaces where they can build that network, having things like rewards and recognition that kind of hype them up, as well as those physical networking spaces, perhaps rebalancing the office from this kind of like desk that you just sit at, creating more spaces for networking as well. So you see loads of different examples there for different types of priorities. I won't have time to go through all of them, but hopefully you'll be able to revisit this and see some of them. So before we conclude, let's have a think about what you can do to get prepared. Z?
Well, like I started off, listen, both passive and active listening, not simply surveys, look at the data and be honest. If you're not really going to practice flexibility, don't say you do, because it'll impact trust. Design realistic personas, not standard process-only journeys. Digitize and simplify. Look at what you already have from the systems of record, and then look through your SaaS applications, your licensed products. See if you can manifest this through applications like Microsoft Teams, where people are actually spending time. Are you making the most of what you have? Then the next step would be to automate and integrate. Now that you've looked at it, you've rationalized, you've simplified, let's look at actually improving processes as automate and integrate. And that's when you should look at buying new tech. Continuous upskilling programs, we said, again, looking at the people side of your employee experience, looking at how we reshape the operating models. How do you work with IT better? How do you work with the front line better? These are really important for heads of internal comms and experienced leaders to step out of their comfort zones and start sort of learning more about these spaces. But the beyond, this is really the piece that we need to focus on, because the metaverse is coming. It's not far off, and there's real value in doing technology leaps into immersive technologies and experiences. We're seeing that 51% of Gen Zs are looking at doing some of their work in the metaverse in the next 2 years. And certainly at EY, we are experimenting with our onboarding processes in the metaverse. I joined during the pandemic, and it would be great to have been onboarded in the metaverse. So definitely start following this checklist. And Kaz, over to you to wrap us up.
Cool. So that is all the slides from us, but we basically wanted to give an opportunity for you guys to pose questions to myself and Z, because we've invested a lot of time in understanding that and the personas and things like that. So over to you guys. You can actually pose questions and vote on other people's questions as well. But I believe we are first going to one of our watch parties to have a live question. I believe we are getting ready to head to New York, where I am joined by Alexa. Hello again, Alexa.
Hey, Kaz. Hey, Z.
Hey, I believe you have a friend with you with a question.
I do. This is Daniel Pierce from Truist, and he does have a question.
Hey, Daniel.
Hi. Wanted to ask, since the pandemic, we were forced into a more remote workplace, and that changed our traditional behaviors in collaboration. How important is it now to evolve that digital workplace strategy, and how do you balance communications and technology to reinvigorate collaboration?
That's a big question. We probably need another hour for that. No, absolutely. I think obviously the data has shown that. I think when it comes to looking at communication, it's important to understand where are people already communicating, where are they already working, because we've sort of come to this happy equilibrium, and we should be starting to create experiences where they're already working. And so when we're looking at stress testing your HR and IT strategies, the ones that we did 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago need to be chucked out. And we need to have that single working group that comes together and designs a strategy that is inclusive and holistic. So from a comms perspective, it's not just send me the communications, I'll put it out in an email. Gone are those days. People need, and certainly Gen Zs and millennials, they're used to that Twitter style, Instagram, TikTok, whatever people are using these days. They need instant gratification and communications to come to them in an engaging manner. No one is sitting there reading long reams of thoroughly edited communication. So again, it's much more about looking at the strategy, but also communicating through existing channels is where I would sort of start with.
Cool. I agree. Also, I think like one thing I also learned from Stephen Bartlett yesterday is kind of investing in understanding the right thing that works for the team and the people that kind of focus on smaller teams, understanding what drives them, where, like how they can collaborate, making sure you've got the right team charter that's agreed on for that team. So yeah, it's a big question as well. We probably could spend more time on it, but hopefully that helps you. We do have a few more questions.
That's the right question to ask, though.
It is, yeah, for sure. We do have a few more questions that have actually come through the Q&A section. I've seen people voting on them, and the highest voted one is from Morten Hussman. So this one is actually on quiet quitting, which actually came up yesterday as well.
Quiet quitting.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a bit of a buzzword at the moment.
Yeah.
I've seen loads of headlines about quiet quitting. Any thoughts on what this means for the digital experience of the future? That's actually quite a difficult one. I actually don't, like, nothing comes to me off the top of my head, but I'm going to think, unless something has come to you.
Elaborate more from what you said. This came up yesterday. Elaborate more on what that actually means.
So yeah, so Stephen Bartlett and I had a bit of a conversation about what quiet quitting meant. Some people essentially think it is people putting in just enough to get by, kind of coasting, not going above and beyond.
Yeah.
Others say it's more kind of like rebalancing that kind of rebalancing work-life balance.
Yeah.
Or some people say it's actually just an indicator of disengaged employees or unengaged employees.
But we're actually seeing, just on that point, digital monitoring tools. These are things that people are very awkward when we speak, especially to our European clients. They're very awkward about trying to talk to their employees about monitoring. But the way I see it is that we monitored you before. If you came into the office and you looked tired and you haven't slept and you're disengaged and you're sitting there on your phone the whole time, we can see it. Now, we can't see it when you're working from home. And yes, we need to have a different conversation. And just because it's a difficult conversation to say, actually, we're going to be putting technology that looks at accountability, not so much monitoring, accountability onto your laptops or discussing it openly in a team charter, we can't shy away from those conversations because it's just going to continue to sort of grow and become bigger and uncomfortable, and then people will be sort of forced to quit and just move on. So I think it's really important to tackle that head on.
Cool. I think we'll have one more question before we wrap up, and that question is from, this is interesting. That question is from Emily. So you talked about teams working more remotely in the future, but we also spoke about the importance of building trust.
Yeah.
How can we still build that kind of trust and strong relationships with our colleagues when we're not physically together as often?
So again, it's about it needs to be intentional, right? So you need to give people, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, you need to give them those, not mandated, but it should be a recommended option to actually come in and meet people physically. So yes, we're going to be more digital, more sort of remote and hybrid. But again, there is nothing stopping us as organizations from encouraging those meetings. I've got one tomorrow where the leader sent out an email and said, I know it's Friday, but we would love for all of you to be in the office because this is definitely a conversation. So thinking about it less as we need to be there in person to build trust. Think about those those high value activities that would be better off in person and plot that across your daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually cycle, and then almost, quote unquote, mandate it.
Great. So unfortunately, we can't get through all the questions. Maybe we'll have a bit of a follow-up after.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions asking about Olivia the connector and whether we're really accommodating for her, whether social spaces work for her. So maybe we'll pick that one up outside of the session and hopefully post something as a follow-up as well.